So I'm Tracey. I'm from CSpark. We sit in the Federal Government Department of Climate Change, Energy, Environment and Water in Canberra. Now, let me just try and change slides. So CSpark was set up just over 2 years ago under the National Waste Policy Action Plan. And our focus was really around Target 4, which is on increasing the use of recycled content by government and industry. But we also complement and work closely with some of the other actions in the action plan. So, for example, the RMF that people might be aware of around increasing our capability to recycle materials and some of the work to improve the collection system. So we sort of come in at the end of the cycle around building demands for the recycled material. And we also work closely with other sort of related policies and drivers that are going across federal government. So the net zero APS commitment that was made by the new government, which has been led by the Department of Finance. So we work closely with them. And more recently, the new commitment made at Environment Ministers meeting in October to achieve a circular economy by 2030. So obviously our work relates closely to that. Similar to MECLA, we seek to create demand, share knowledge, demonstrate what's possible and deliver outcomes through procurement. So we have a very strong procurement focus and we work in two main areas, one across the Australian Public Service, the APS, and another with industry. So in terms of what we do with the APS, we have a range of resources and support to help staff when they're doing a procurement consider how they'll include environmental sustainability. Just for context, over half of what the federal government buys is services of some sort. So there's not a huge amount of goods. That tends to be more sort of state and territory and local government. But the kinds of goods that where we see our biggest opportunities are around things like office fit outs, capital works, and IT. Our team has a range of resources available and they're all available on our website. So we have our sustainable procurement guide that we released about 2 years ago, which is really about how to embed sustainability in the APS sort of procurement steps. We have some model clauses available on the finance website so people can use them in their approaches to market and in contracts. We have a help desk. We have, I think we're up to 5 or 6 now masterclasses available that are also on our website. And I should give a plug. I think we've got one coming up this week as well, but they're recorded and they're available. We have some case studies. And we have a series of videos, there's 19 in total, showcasing different Australian companies that manufacture with recycled content. A lot of this was created, like when we go out and speak with our colleagues, they all agree sustainability is a great idea. And, and they want to consider it but they don't know how, or they're concerned that they don't know if it'll meet their requirements, they don't know if it'll be available, they don't know how it's tested. So a lot of our work over the last couple of years has just been providing information and reassurance to people on how to do it. And as a team, we're always really keen to meet with industry or academics or researchers and state and territory governments to share learnings and to see where we can work together, because this is a fairly new field for federal government. And we're aware that, we don't have all the answers. The other area work we do is around increasing use of recycled content in roads and infrastructure. And there's 3 key projects that we've delivered over this past year. The first was some research that we engaged the Australian Roads Research Board to do. So they looked at 10 different recycled materials and developed some best practice advice on, what can be included in road infrastructure and also the economic, social and environmental benefits and costs of doing so. There's also a series of fact sheets and case studies that support that and a webinar, and that's all available on the ARB website, not on ours. The second piece of work is some work we're doing with Infrastructure Australia, which will hopefully get released this week. So keep an eye out. So Infrastructure Australia each year releases their market capacity program. So it's a really sort of big model that looks at the major infrastructure pipeline and forecasts demand for a lot of different things. So like materials, skills, equipment, and looks at a whole lot of risks. So we can see, when there's going to be peak demand and peak pressure. What we've engaged them to do is looking at the materials forecast, looking at how much of that could be with existing specs. We could use recycled or reused material. So they phrase it around replacement materials. And there'll be a really fantastic dashboard on their website. You can drill down by state and material type. And they do forecasts against what we could do currently, but also has, if we had better tech and different specs, what we could do. And then they have some wonderful blue sky projections. And the third piece of work that we're doing is an innovation challenge with the Infrastructure Sustainability Council. So they run the IS rating scheme. So there's a pilot or innovation challenge on at the moment that projects can choose to participate in around increasing use of recycled content and recognising that within their projects to get points under the scheme. So that will be running for another 1.5 years, and it's open to any project that's seeking an IS rating. So they're the key bits of work we're doing. And if anyone has any questions or wants to talk further, I'm really happy for people to reach out and make contact. But now I'd like to hand over to my colleague, Erik. He's going to talk about some really great work that's happening around ReMade in Australia. If I can stop sharing.
Thanks very much, Tracey. Hello, everyone. My name is Erik van Wijk. I'm the Director of the Recycled Content Verification and Traceability section in the Department of, what are we now with? Climate Change, Energy, Environment and Water. If you bear with me, I'll just get a presentation and I'll start sharing my screen. Hopefully I can navigate technology. Okay, is everyone seeing that slide?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about the development of a brand and a labelling scheme for Australian-made recycled content products, which is called ReMade in Australia. Before I begin, though, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I'm on today, the Ngunnawal and the Ngambri people. I acknowledge and respect their continuing culture, connection to country, and the contribution they make to life, the city and region. And I extend that recognition and respect to the traditional custodians of the lands on which we're all gathered today, and to any First Nations people attending today's event. Now, in October this year, all Australia's environment ministers agreed to work with the private sector to design out waste and pollution and keep materials in use and foster markets to achieve a circular economy by 2030. Using recycled content in manufacturing and construction is an important part of this journey to achieving a circular economy because it keeps materials in productive use for longer. We know that people want to shop sustainably. Bear with me for a moment. Sorry, I was having some technical challenges here. We know that people want to buy it more sustainably, and global demand for sustainable products is growing. A 2020 survey by Curious Please found 9 out of 10 Australians want to buy sustainable and ethically produced products. And research commissioned by the department shows that Australians are willing to pay a price premium for recycled content products. We also know that unclear labelling is the main reason that 3 in 5 Australians find it hard to shop sustainably. Greenwashing, where companies make misleading, inaccurate or overstated environmental claims, makes it difficult for consumers to shop sustainably. A study from the EU estimates about 40% of environmental claims made online are greenwashed, and it's an issue in Australia too. The ACCC has listed misleading environmental claims as a priority target area for compliance and enforcement this year. To support manufacturing and building with Australian recycled content, the Australian government has committed $8 million to implement a ReMade in Australia brand, which will be implemented as a certification trademark. We're designing the brand to promote consumer confidence in and demand for recycled content products, to support an increase in manufacturing using Australian recycled content, and construction, I should say as well, and promoting resource circularity in the Australian economy. Now, at this stage, we're relatively early in the design phase, but we think that ReMade in Australia brand should be able to apply broadly. So that includes consumer goods to packaging, as well as construction materials and projects. We think that the brand's use of Australian recyclate is a unique point of difference when you compare the ReMade in Australia brand to other eco-labels in the market that certify recycled content use. Now, this slide shows a creative concept of how the brand may appear as a logo. Important to note that this is just a creative concept at this stage. We're proposing that the ReMade in Australia brand will be implemented as a voluntary label that interested manufacturers and construction companies can use to promote their Australian-made recycled content products, construction materials and projects. It will be established as a certification trademark, and we expect that this will be administered by a third-party licensing body. Now, certification trademark is a type of intellectual property right that establishes a logo for use by licensees where they meet certain rules. And a couple of well-known examples that you might be familiar with include the Walmart and Australian-made trademarks. Now, I'll give you a quick overview of how the scheme might work once it's been established. We envisage that manufacturers and construction companies would apply for a license to use the ReMade brand on a product-by-product or project-by-project basis. The licensing body would assess the application to ensure that the product or project meets the eligibility requirements, and the use of the recycled content and potentially other requirements would be verified at that stage. If the eligibility rules are met, the licensing body would be granting a license for the use of the ReMade logo or brand. Similar to other eco-labels, we imagine there'd be an ongoing process to confirm that the product continues to meet the eligibility rules. Now, while there are other eco-labels operating in Australia, none focus specifically on recycled content, have a requirement for at least some of that recyclate to come from Australian sources, or for those products to be made in Australia. And we think this is where ReMade in Australia can really stand out. We're currently working through a few design questions, and we've been exploring these through a series of webinars and workshops that we've been running over the last month or so. And we'll be setting these issues out in a discussion paper, which we hope to have available later this year. Not long to go now, is it? The questions that we're sort of contemplating in the design phase relate to the rules, which will ultimately set out how and on what type of products the brand can be used on and how the scheme will operate. To ensure that the scheme ultimately delivers on its objectives, we're focusing our attention on a small number of design issues at this stage. For example, we think that broad uptake of the scheme can create market cut-through for recyclables and maximise the pull-through. As such, we're designing a scheme so that the label can apply broadly, and as I mentioned, that's towards consumer goods to packaging, construction materials and projects. To drive demand for recycled content, we also need to define what requirements we should have around the amount of recycled content used in branded products. If the brand applies broadly, how can the rules be structured to accommodate the very different requirements that will exist between different products? A key driver for the scheme is to promote the use of Australian recyclate, so an important question will be how much of the overall recycled content in ReMade products should be from Australian sources. Now, based on what we've heard so far through our initial consultations, we're looking at about a 51% threshold for the overall recycled content to come from Australian sources. Now, we also need to work out how best to communicate this to consumers and to customers. For example, do we use a simple threshold, or do we allow the label to display the minimum amount of recycled content that can be included in that product or project? Some other questions that we're exploring, should ReMade materials be recyclable or ReMade products be recyclable? We think it would be a bad outcome if ReMade products were routinely ending up in landfill, for example. Another issue is, does the scheme need to include requirements to manage issues like chemicals of concern that can sometimes propagate their way through recyclable materials? It's possible, of course, that existing protections are sufficient, but these are the sorts of issues we're trying to work through at the moment. We really want to work with the industry to understand how manufacturers and construction firms can best verify the type of claims as part of an application process. And we understand that in many cases, businesses will already have systems or procedures in place, and we're keeping sorts of records that we're probably interested in for a ReMade in Australia brand. Now, in order for the scheme to be successful, we're really conscious that we need to balance all of these considerations so that the brand is trusted and credible, but it's practical enough to meet. Now, we think the ReMade in Australia brand will offer value to manufacturers and builders who want to do the right thing by using recycled content. By providing them access to a trusted and verified label that helps motivated consumers or customers shop sustainably, we think the brand can help attract new motivated customers willing to pay for sustainable made products, help legitimate recycled content products stand out in the markets that are currently susceptible to greenwashing, and help manufacturers or construction firms meet emerging recycled content requirements. And of course, grow the circular economy. We think ReMade can add value to the recycling sector too. For example, recyclers and reprocessors can help meet increased demand for recyclate to make ReMade products. And the scheme can increase consumer and business awareness and the benefits of value and the value of using recyclate to make new things. I'll just flag at the moment too that we are exploring the potential to develop a ReMade Partners program to support the brand. This could mean that those who don't necessarily manufacture or make things with recycled content could still participate in the scheme. And one example of what this might look like could be a ReMade Supplier of Choice program. So that could help high quality recyclers stand out to buyers who are in the ReMade scheme themselves. Now, proving or verifying recycled content claims as part of the brand will be really key to protect it from greenwashing and to give customers and consumers the peace of mind that they are buying responsibly. At this stage, we've identified 3 broad potential levels of verification that could help substantiate the claims that will be made by brand users. The first type is the simplest and require manufacturers to maintain basic records for each claim.
21?
For example,
Oh my gosh.
hello.
Rain parrot. It's gonna rain in 21 minutes.
What the hell? I might just yep, nice. Good. Sorry, I'll keep going. So yeah, the first type of verification is the simplest and would require manufacturers or construction firms to maintain basic records for each claim. For example, records of proof of purchase for recycled feedstock to show its origin, records of the manufacturer's suppliers and customers, which is often referred to as one up and one down traceability, and manufacturing records of contracts to show when and how recycled content goods were made. Most businesses, we assume, would be collecting these types of records as part of normal business anyway. But the question I guess we're grappling with at the moment is whether or not this type of verification is robust enough. The second type of verification we're considering is based on chain of custody models, which are different methods for controlling the movement of inputs and outputs and associated information through the supply chain. These approaches are often used in things like forestry, wool, cotton, and other agricultural sectors to demonstrate the provenance of products. Now, things like mass balance, control blending, segregated and identity preservation models may provide a good basis for verifying recycled content claims. And I'd be really interested to hear from this group, in particular, if these methodologies or alternative ones are currently used in the construction sector at all. Now, the third and final type of verification involves things like advanced traceability systems. And this can include technology such as blockchain-based systems that assemble chronological blocks of encrypted data to form a single source of truth for a trace product. And it can include links to other things such as tracer technologies based on RFID tags or scannable pigments, those sorts of things. It's really an emerging sector at the moment. Now, as we go through from record keeping to advanced traceability system, the robustness and verification and the confidence in that verification increases, but so too does the complexity and the level of cooperation required across the supply chain, as well as, of course, implementation costs. So this is something that we're currently sort of looking into a bit more. I'll just give a little bit of visibility to another piece of work that my team is working on at the moment, and that is we're in the early stages of developing and designing a national traceability framework to help guide future industry investment in traceability systems for recycled content. We envisage that this framework is actually a standalone project, but it does have some links to ReMade, which is why we're mentioning it now. Now, to be clear, I don't expect government will be mandating traceability for recycled content or investing itself in sophisticated traceability systems. But we know that traceability is becoming increasingly important for buyers of recyclate, and there's probably a current gap for some recycled content at the moment. So through the development of the National Traceability Framework, we are interested in providing guidance to enhance uptake and the eventual interoperability of traceability for recycled content across supply chains. And I just wanted to give a snapshot of that piece of work as well. Now, moving back to ReMade, as I mentioned, we've held a series of webinars over the last month, and hopefully some of you may have had a chance to attend those. If not, the presentation that I'm giving today is quite similar, but those sessions have been recorded and are available on our website. The next thing that we're doing is we've commissioned some market research to help better understand consumer expectations and business expectations of a recycled content brand and a verified labelling scheme. We're hoping, as I mentioned, to get a discussion paper out before the end of this year. And once we've gone through that consultation exercise, the next steps include presenting some options to government to consider how they want to implement the scheme. We'll need to formally draft the rules which support the certification trademark. Those will need to be assessed by the ACCC. and then IP Australia will consider our trademark application. And that's a process that does take some time, as there are a number of steps involved. At around sort of Q2 next year, we expect that decisions around an appropriate licensing body to administer the scheme will be taken. And we're working very hard to ensure that the brand will be able to be launched. And at this stage, we're pretty confident we can do that by the end of 2023. Now, we're relatively early in the design phase. And so, yeah, like I mentioned, we have that discussion paper that's coming out hopefully in the not too distant future. But yeah, we're of course happy and really interested to hear more from those in the sector at the moment. And so we can let you know when the discussion paper's out. And if you have any sort of comments you'd like to discuss and hear a little bit more about it, you can reach out to my team at ReMade in Australia at dcceew.gov.au. And I'll finish my presentation there and ask if there are any questions.
Thank you so much. That's really, really interesting. I know there's been a couple of questions popped into the chat box. So if you're okay, we'll start with those and then we'll get others to jump in. So there was one, is ReMade in Australia B2B, B2C or both?
It's an interesting question and one that we're currently looking into, and we'll be keen to hear from as well. I think when we started our design work, our thinking has been very much around, I guess, business to consumer products. But I think there's an open question about whether or not some business to business products should be within scope as well. And would certainly like to hear more about that. And the discussion paper will provide an opportunity for us to hear that type of feedback.
Yeah, great. The next one was, is that 50% of the recycled content needs to be Australian, i.e. can you have 30% recycled content in a product, so 70% is non-recycled, and 15% of the total content is Australian recycled, will it get the label?
Yeah, it's I guess one of the key things that help support the scheme. So this is a question that we're currently working through. We've heard from stakeholders so far that setting a really high threshold for recycled content might limit uptake, and because there could be quite practical reasons why high levels of recycled content might not be able to be incorporated into products or into projects. So we're exploring the different types of claims that might be able to support the brand. So for example, whether or not there might be a minimum threshold that's required. So that could just, let's say for argument's sake, and that's all it is at this point, say 10%, or we could potentially allow users of the brand to specify how much recycled content is in their product. Now, there's two parts to it, and it does get a little bit complicated, but we have recycled content generally, and then the Australian component of that. So of the Australian recycled content, we're suggesting that at this stage, at least half of that, or 51%, should come from Australian sources. But we've also heard that there are challenges as the, I guess, recycled content markets are maturing in Australia, where some companies might be experiencing supply chain volatility, for example. And so that flexibility between Australian and sort of imported recycler is something that's probably important at this stage. So the quick answer to the question is yes, probably, but there's obviously no decisions have been taken at this point, and there's obviously quite a bit of detail to work through.
Thank you. I've got a question, Richard Choi.
Okay, hi. Two questions. The first one's a quick and easy one for you. Based on your survey, what price loading are consumers willing to pay for sustainable products? Is it 10% or 20% or not specified?
That's a great question. Sorry, Richard, I don't have that information at hand. I'll have to loop back with you on that one.
Okay. Second one, which other groups are you working with? As you may be aware, the building and construction industry has had issues with regard to conformance and compliance, and therefore groups like the ACCC and the ABCB, plus the state governments, are looking at ways to follow the chain of procurement regarding the construction industry products, materials, assemblies, etc. Are you working with any of them?
Yeah, so we've had pretty broad consultations so far, but I suspect there are some people who we haven't had a chance to engage with yet. So webinars have been made available broadly, so to manufacturers, recyclers. We've had some state and territory and local government representatives achieve those we've had initial conversations with groups like the ACCC as well. And I presented a quick update to state and territory officials last week through the Resource Recovery Reference Group as well. So there's been some visibility at that level. The discussion paper will be open to everyone, and so we're expecting that'll be published hopefully before the end of the year and be open for at least a month or so to gain more feedback. But recommend, yeah, if there are people we should be talking to, absolutely would be grateful to hear of some recommendations, and we can follow that up.
Good, thanks. Look, I suggest you contact the senior officers group dealing with regulatory change of state governments.
Perfect, thank you.
Thanks. Josephine.
Thank you. Excellent. Sounds really great. A lot of my research is around databases and tools on building materials to do exactly this, to find all that kind of information on environmental requirements that is so difficult for companies to dig down if they are specifying particular materials or if they are manufacturers trying to sell it. So as part of that, in the recycling and circular economy sphere, I've been working with New South Wales government on a kind of a tool to help in New South Wales. So is it like linking in there, a different government, but does it work?
I haven't heard of that work previously, but I'd love to take a look at it. And so if that's something you're able to share, if you could,
Yep.
if you could connect us up later, that'd be great.
No worries, I'll get in touch.
Any other questions? I can't see any hands up. No. So, Erik, you mentioned the discussion paper. Where's the best place for everyone to get that? Are you able to put a link in the chat or let us know and we can share it with the group?
Yes, it'll be on our website. I don't have the exact link to hand yet because we're still working through the publication process, but I'll be able to, through Tracey, make sure that we can provide the link through to this group.
That'd be brilliant, because and the time for you said, when does the consultation time finish?
Yeah, so we're hoping to get it out before the end of this year. So there's obviously only a couple of weeks left, which is pretty scary. We're hoping to have it at least open for a month, but we're looking if we can extend that into February a little bit as well to give people some more time to engage with it.
Perfect. Thank you. And I think, I mean, your comments around the amount of content will be really interesting, because it's, you know, I think you said if it's set too high, that it might, you know, stop recycled content that could be there at a lower amount to start with, but gradually increase as you change processes and systems in manufacturing. Sometimes it's very hard to change all of something very quickly. It takes a long time, so you can gradually build up that sort of, you know, the amount you can include and what types of materials are available. And then probably the biggest thing for me is that we, as a manufacturer, I work in bricks, roof tiles, concrete products, we have quite a lot of recycled content coming into all our products. Our biggest hurdle is the EPA, because they stop us. They don't like us putting recycled content in, because it's what someone else's waste. I call it, it's a raw material to us, but they consider it waste. So therefore your classifications around your license and what you can bring on site and how you can store it, even though it's all might be completely non-hazardous, no effect, it's a really hard thing for a manufacturer to bring recycled content onto your site and put it in products. So it's one of the dichotomies I always say, that you got, and in New South Wales, it's just one of our states because we operate around the country. We have New South Wales Circular encouraging us to put waste in our materials and recycle it, to divert it from landfill, but then the EPA won't amend our licenses to allow us to do it. So I know I've discussed with a lot of other manufacturers in Australia, and they're on a similar sort of thing, that's a really hard thing to do. So that's part of it's something that needs to be addressed at the same time.
Yeah, I've certainly heard those sorts of issues being raised through the consultation so far as well. So it's not the first time I've heard things like that. I think the challenging thing for us is, you know, we can't solve everything through this process. So it is intended to be a voluntary label that helps ultimately promote recycled content products. And so there's a limit to what we can do, but hopefully through raising awareness of the benefits and the value that recycled content products can have, some of these things might might shift over time as well.
Sorry, Richard here with just another thing. Erik, or maybe even Tracey, one of the issues we're finding in the industry is that there's actually insufficient recycled waste for multiple products. So they come out with, let's take the work we did with Sustainability Victoria on recycling plastics from curbsides. Now, it can quite easily go into roadworks, and that in fact permits 2 cycles at least, i.e. the more recycle you put into roadwork, you lose certain properties, and therefore you can only recycle so many times. So the problem may be eventually we get all these products, they're using certain materials, and then we run out of materials. And that goes for glass, for concrete, and a whole lot of other things. Are you also looking at those aspects?
Yeah, so again, it's one of those things that has been raised. Listen, this is of course quite a complex space, and there are many sort of different competing, I guess, levers and issues in a scheme like this. So it's something we've heard about. I think, you know, these are challenges that will probably become more prominent as the transition to a circular economy sort of ramps up and gets looked at in that context too. So obviously the discussion paper might canvas some of these issues in a little bit more detail, and we can, I guess, have a discussion through that process. But again, I think there's, with a brand like this, the focus very much on, I guess, raising awareness and helping people identify those recycled content products. And there are certain things obviously which it won't be able to address necessarily, just because it's a relatively defined has a relatively defined scope, I guess.